So I heard an interesting story about Muhammad Ali that I didn't know about before. In 1964, Muhammad Ali was fighting in his first ever championship bout against Sonny Liston. And here's what I didn't know, because when we talk about Muhammad Ali, we're all looking back at the greatest champion of all time, greatest fighter of all time, all of these things, right? But no one expected Muhammad Ali to win that fight. Sonny Liston was a monster of a man, and at the time, he was the poster child for boxing. It was believed that he was going to be the champion for a very, very long time. And here's what's even interesting. It's not even that they didn't think Muhammad Ali was going to win. They didn't think he was going to survive the first few rounds. Ali was the clear underdog. But as many of you probably know, Muhammad Ali would go on to stun the world and become the new heavyweight champion. Here's what I didn't know about this fight, though. I didn't know that Muhammad Ali almost quit this fight after the first few rounds. After the first 3 rounds, Muhammad Ali, he started off great. It was very clear he was faster than Sonny Liston. He was ducking and dodging. He was actually toying with Sonny Liston a little bit. It was clear that he had the upper hand. And then he did something in the first few rounds that no one had ever done up until this point with Sonny Liston. He hit him. And not only did he hit him so hard that for the first time in Sonny Liston's professional career, he was busted open under his eye. And so at this point, Muhammad Ali is steamrolling through this fight. He is doing way better than anyone anticipated until after the 3rd round. After the 3rd round, there's a sports reporter in the corner for Sonny Liston, and he overhears Sonny Liston shouting to his corner man, and he is shouting to him, "Juice the gloves, juice the gloves." Now, if you don't know what juice the gloves means, what he's asking his corner man to do is to rub a substance on his gloves so that he could hurt and blind Muhammad Ali in the next round. And so what happens is we get the 4th round begins, the guys, they start coming after each other, and then it became immediate what happened. The guys, they lock up, which you've ever seen boxers kind of just grab each other like this. And then you see Sonny Liston kind of scrape his glove across Muhammad Ali's eyes. And you could tell immediately something happened. Something was not right. Even the television reporters that were commentating during this fight began to wonder why something so drastically changed in Muhammad Ali and why all of a sudden he was blinking profusely. There was something not right. Ali knew that something was wrong. So after this round, he comes back into his corner and he's telling his corner man what's going on, and he was ready to quit. He asked his corner man to cut off his gloves. "I'm done." But his corner man wouldn't allow him to do it, especially not in a championship fight. So he tried to flush out whatever he could from Muhammad Ali's eyes to try to get whatever substance was in his eyes out. He tried to reassure Ali by telling him that the pain would pass. "You will be fine. You will get through this. Just wait for your eyes to clear. Keep moving and wait for your eyes to clear." And that's when another corner man in Ali's corner gave him some other tactical advice. He said, "Listen, Ali, you got to yardstick him, champ. You got to yardstick him." And here's what this means. In boxing, when you try to judge and gauge how far you are, you can yardstick. So he's telling Muhammad Ali, just keep your arm out. And as long as Sonny Liston is beyond your arm's reach, you are safe. Just yardstick and keep moving. Just yardstick and keep moving. This will pass. So Ali goes on to fight the next round, gets into the 5th round. Midway through the 5th round, you can tell Ali's vision started to clear, because at this point, Muhammad Ali began to shout, "You ain't got nothing. You ain't got nothing." And he starts toying with Sonny Liston all over again. And then he goes on to do something that is so demeaning to everyone in the fighting industry. He goes on to slap Sonny Liston multiple times in the face. So at this point, it was like Muhammad Ali was a father toying around with one of his children. Liston gets a beating in round 6. Then right before the 7th round, Liston quits. Now here's why I share this story with you. Because I wonder how many of us are here today and we can relate to what exactly is going on here. How many of you feel like you've got a great start, that things are going great in your lives, you're breezing through the rounds, but you're moving swiftly, but then out of nowhere, it seems like the enemy juiced the gloves. Out of nowhere, you're experiencing pain and confusion. And if we're just being honest with ourselves, you're ready to throw in the towel. You're ready to cut off the gloves. You're ready to get out of there. Some of you are here today and you're stunned. You're in pain and you're just hoping that you can blink it all away. You're just out here yardsticking the enemy, trying to get through without taking too much of a beating. You're hoping that relief is around the corner. You just want to escape defeat, and you're here waiting for your victory. And here's the good news. You can do hard things. You can do hard things. You can persevere. You just need to remain steadfast. In fact, that's the goal of James. That's what we're going to be talking about in this series through the book of James. We're going to be spending time over the next several weeks studying what James has to say and see how you and I can remain steadfast no matter what life throws our way. And we're not talking about just making it through the first several rounds, but how you and I can remain steadfast and go the distance. So here's how James starts off in James chapter 1, verse 1. He says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Now, let's be honest. One of our biggest frustrations that people have is when they go through hard things. One of the biggest frustrations people have with God is that they go through difficult things. I mean, have you ever been in the middle of something and found yourself wondering, God, why is this happening? This isn't fair. I've been a good person. I go to church. I serve you. I do all the things. Why is this happening? And there is a certain humanness to this. We all get it. The argument usually unfolds something like, God, I can't believe this is happening. I don't deserve this. God, if you really loved me, you wouldn't let this happen to me. And whether we say it out loud or not, deep down, it often ends with us making an accusation against God, as if we deserve better and he is holding out on us. But let me just kind of float this out there to you today. What if the problem isn't God at all? What if the problem is that we have a flawed perspective on suffering? See, we tend to view suffering as something to escape. We want to avoid pain at all costs. But James opens his letter with something shocking. He says, consider it pure joy. Pure joy when life is falling apart. James is saying something radical here. Trials aren't obstacles to avoid, they're opportunities for growth. Think about it. If God's goal is to make us stronger and wiser and more like him, then wouldn't it make sense that he allows us to go through things that shape us? And what if the trials that you're trying to escape are actually the tools that God is using to make you stronger? We tend to assume that because life is hard, God must not love us. But what if, because he loves us, he allows us to go through hard things? A good father doesn't shield his child from every difficulty. He allows challenges that will prepare them for what's ahead. A good coach pushes an athlete beyond their comfort zone. A good teacher doesn't give easy tests. They continue to challenge their students to grow. A good parent doesn't remove every obstacle, but teaches their child how to navigate them. If suffering really does shape us into the people that God wants us to be, if suffering helps us become the man and the woman that God created us to be, why would a loving father rob us of that growth? So, the next time we find ourselves making accusations against God and saying things like, God, how could you let this happen? Maybe we should pause maybe instead of seeing suffering as something to escape, we should view it as an invitation to grow. Paul understood this. He knew that suffering wasn't a curse. Instead, he believed that it was a pathway to transformation. Paul says it this way in Romans 5. We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. In other words, suffering can be a blessing if we allow it to be. Joy in trials isn't about ignoring pain. It's about trusting that God is using the difficulties to shape us into who he wants us to be. True faith isn't proven in comfort, but how we respond when life is hard. And here's the thing, and I'll say it over and over and over again, the more we go through, the more we can get through. The more we go through, the more we can continue to get through. So instead of running from trials, what if we embrace them as part of God's process? Because again, here's the truth. You can do hard things. You can do hard things. You can do hard things. And when you do, you don't just survive. You grow. You become better. You become more and more like the person that God has designed you to be. And so James continues down this path. He says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So again, trials are not just things to endure, they are opportunities to grow because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. So James explains why we should see trials differently. And he says it's because they test your faith. But let's be clear. God doesn't test us to prove something to himself because he already knows where we stand. The testing is for us. Because what he says is testing reveals what we actually believe. Testing reveals how far you are willing to go in obedience to him. What testing does is it shows whether our faith is real or if it's just circumstantial. Is what you say and do real, or are you only doing this when everything is great and going the way that you think it should? And we see this happen to Abraham in Genesis 22. If you remember, God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, not because God needed proof of Abraham's faith, but because Abraham needed to see for himself how far he was willing to go in trusting God. So in Genesis 22, God gave Abraham this gut-wrenching command. In Genesis 22, verse 2, he says, Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. And yes, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering is as awful as it reads. That is exactly what God was asking him to do. Now imagine the weight of that though. Because Isaac wasn't just any son. Isaac was the child of promise. He was the one that God miraculously gave to Abraham and Sarah in their old age. And not only that, Isaac was the fulfillment of God's covenant, that he is the one whom Abraham and his descendants would become a great nation. And most of all, Isaac was Abraham's greatest joy. And now God is asking Abraham to take Isaac and lay him on an altar as a burnt offering. Can you imagine what is going through his mind? I would imagine it's something along the lines of, God, this doesn't make sense. This is the son that you promised me. You gave him to me. That you're going to do this whole thing through me and through my son. And so he's yours. He's not really mine. What are you talking about, God? How could you ask me to do this? But here's the remarkable thing. Despite all these questions, Abraham obeyed. He got up the next morning. He loaded the wood. He took Isaac and he started the journey to Mount Moriah. And when they arrived, Isaac, who is completely unaware of what's going on, he asks a heartbreaking question to his father. In Genesis 22, verse 7, he says, the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? He's catching on. Something's not making sense here. Something is not the way that it's supposed to be. And then Abraham gives him this response in the next verse. He says, God himself will provide the lamb. And even though he said it, still, step by step, Abraham built the altar. He arranged the wood. He tied up his son, the one who he loved more than anything, and he laid him on the altar. And then just as he raises up his knife to sacrifice his son, God interrupted. God intervened. We see this in Genesis 22:12. He says, do not lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And in that moment, Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket. God provided. Now, this was never about God needing proof of Abraham's faith. It was about Abraham needing to know what was really going on in his own heart. Would he trust God when it didn't make sense? Would he obey even when it cost him everything? Would he put God first even above his greatest earthly joy? This test wasn't for God, it was for Abraham. And the same is true for us. When we go through hard things, they reveal what we actually believe. It reveals whether we trust God only in the good times or in the hard times too. It reveals if we truly live with open hands and are we willing to surrender to God. That's why James says, consider it pure joy and consider trials as joy, because trials are what builds that perseverance in us. Trials reveal our faith, but they also refine it. It's like a fire purifies gold. Peter uses this analogy in 1 Peter chapter 1. He says, these trials have come so that they are proven genuineness of your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. He says fire, or gold, is refined by fire, and that it melts away impurities. In trials, it does the same thing to our faith. They expose and burn away anything weak or superficial, leaving behind something stronger and more genuine. And the truth is, this takes time. Growth takes time. It's not here today and gone tomorrow. It can be a season. And sometimes we're sitting here, we're begging for God to take away this trial. We're begging him to take away these challenges. But if he did, we would miss out on the maturity that comes through endurance. A butterfly has to struggle out of the cocoon to develop strong wings. If someone cuts it out too soon, it never flies. A muscle has to be worked out and stretched in order to grow stronger. If you avoid the pain of training, you stay weak. A tree that faces storms develops deep roots, but a tree that grows in perfect conditions gets knocked over easily. God isn't just interested in momentary relief. He is shaping us. He is shaping you and shaping me so that we can become something greater. So how does this work? God promises to give us what we need, and we see this in verse 5. James says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. So what we see here is that it's one thing to endure hardship, but it's another thing to navigate it well. So James says that if you're in the middle of hardship and you're lacking wisdom, you're lacking insight, you're lacking for how to know how to navigate this, if you ask God, he will give it to you. And so sometimes our first instinct in the trial is to ask God to remove it, when instead we should be asking him, what do you want me to learn from this? James 4 tells us that God's goal is maturity and wholeness, but how does this happen? And then he connects it quickly to verse 5. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask for it. When we go through trials, our biggest need isn't always to escape. The biggest need is the wisdom to navigate it. And here's the thing, wisdom is not the same as knowledge. Knowledge is about knowing facts. Wisdom is about knowing what to do with the facts. Knowledge can be learned. Wisdom comes from God's perspective. And when we're struggling, we often ask God, how do I get out of this? Or when will this end? Or why is this happening? But James is teaching us to ask different questions. He's telling us that we should be asking God, what do you want me to learn from this? Why am I going through this? How can I honor you in this situation? What is the wise way forward? I don't want to run, but how do I move forward in a way that is honoring and wise? And this is why wisdom is essential in trials, because trials don't just shape us by accident. They shape us when we respond to them with wisdom. So if you need wisdom, ask for it. God's not stingy with his wisdom. He doesn't make us qualify for it. He doesn't say, come on, man, you should already know this. You made your bed, now lie in it. Come on. I'll help you figure it out after you determine what you've done wrong. No, that's not how God works. He says, if you want wisdom, ask for it. He gives wisdom generously without finding fault. You kind of think of it this way. My daughter loves puzzles. And she doesn't just, she's 14, almost 15. She doesn't love like the 50-piece puzzles, which I love those because those are easy. She graduated on the 500-piece puzzles. Now I think she's looking at 1,000-piece puzzles or something like that. Every holiday we get a big puzzle out, and she loves to put it together while school's out. And I will help her sometimes. I have no idea what I'm doing. I get so stuck in there, and I'm looking for pieces, and sometimes it's these very detailed pictures, and when you break it into the smaller pieces, it doesn't always make sense, and so here I am with just 2 puzzle pieces sometimes, and it doesn't fit, I don't know, but here's my point. I have to often go back and look at the front of the box. I have to see the bigger picture so I know where all the pieces fall in accordance to the bigger picture. And how many of us with our kids, if they're building a puzzle and they're asking for help, how many of us as parents would not want to show them the bigger picture so that they can see how what they're building is coming together? And that's exactly what we see James is telling us about God, that listen, if you're going through this and you can't see how it fits into the bigger picture, if you don't know how to handle this little piece and how it fits in with the piece before it and the piece after it, just ask God for wisdom. He would love to give it to you. He wants to help you. He wants you to see the bigger picture. God wants us to seek him in our struggles, not as a last resort, but as a first instinct. In Proverbs chapter 3, we're told, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. That is a promise. If you acknowledge him, he will make your path straight. And then James 1:6 tells us the next step, but if you need wisdom, you must ask. And verse 6, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea blown and tossed by the wind. So we must acknowledge God in all we do. And we must believe when we're approaching God, we must believe that he can actually do what we're asking him to do. And so how do we acknowledge God in our trials? We invite him into everything that we do. I think oftentimes we face hard times, we run into isolation, we withdraw from those around us, but we also try to pull back from God. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's confusion, it can be a number of different things, but what we need to do is invite God into everything that we do. We also need to stop relying on our own understanding and seek his wisdom first. Because chances are you don't know how to get through what you're going through. You need his help. You need his wisdom. You need his guidance. And then we trust that if he allows something, he must have a purpose for it. And so this is us saying, God, I trust you even when I don't see the full picture. I'm going to keep building. I'm going to keep getting the pieces together. I'm going to keep organizing this thing. I will not rely on my emotions or my fears or my limited understanding. God, I'm leaning on you for wisdom. And then we're given this warning in verse 9, though, if you ask for wisdom but don't believe it, if you're not fully leaning on him and you're just saying it with your words, that person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all that they do. So we get a warning from James about those who are doubting God's wisdom. And we're not talking about the occasional doubt, but in a divided heart, double-minded heart. A double-minded person is someone who says they trust God, but they still do what they think is best. A double-minded person is someone who asks for wisdom, and God makes it super clear, but they just don't apply it. They're the person who treats faith like an option instead of a foundation. And then James gives us this word picture that he says a double-minded person is like a boat that's tossed in the waves, that it's unstable, it's directionless, it's drifting. One moment, here I am, I trust God, things are great. Then the moment you hit another wave and you swerve the other way, they panic and they're trying to do whatever they can to take control back. They go back and forth and they never fully commit. And what James is saying is, I want you to fully commit and fully believe and walk in wisdom. And we do that by asking for wisdom first. We don't just ask for it. We don't just pray when we're desperate. We seek God at the start of our decisions. We trust his perspective over our feelings, because feelings aren't real. They aren't always reliable. They're fleeting. They can change so quickly. Wisdom is about seeing things through God's eyes, who's the same today, yesterday, and forever. And then actually doing what he says. So often we think it's an information problem, but it's an application problem. You and I oftentimes know what we do or what we should do. We just don't do it. And we need to follow through on what God is telling us to do. God's wisdom isn't something we hear, it's something we follow. And then this is how James goes on to wrap it up in verse 9. He says, believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom falls and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. Verse 12, blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because they will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Here's a wild thought. I don't know if you think about this, but how we handle the tough times we face and how we handle the battles that we face, the challenges that we face, they impact our eternity. And I think so often we get so stuck in the here and now, but while they do impact our immediate, they have an impact on our eternity. What we're facing and what we're struggling through and fighting through, it's not just today. It pays off for eternity. So what does that mean for us? It means that instead of resenting trials, we rejoice in them because they produce perseverance. The more that you go through, the more you can get through. Instead of relying on ourselves, we ask God for wisdom because he's willing to give it to us generously. And instead of wavering in doubt, we stand firm in faith because we trust that God is faithful. Instead of giving up in hardship, we hold on to hope because we believe that there is a reward for us at the end. So let me ask you just a couple things as we wrap up. What if the trial you're in right now is actually producing something greater in you than you even know? How would things change for you if years from now you knew you'd look back and realize that this is the season that made you stronger? That what you're going through is actually a turning point that helped you become the man or the woman that God designed for you to be? What if the reward on the other side was so much greater than the pain of the process? Because the more you go through, the more you can get through. You can do hard things. And when you do, God is making you into who he has created you to be. So when your enemy juices their gloves, and when the next trial comes, and it's not an if, it's a will, you have a choice. Will you quit? Throw in the towel, cut off the gloves, try to resist what it is you're going through, complain and try to escape it? Or will you embrace it and ask God for wisdom and trust that He is working in you? Because those who persevere will be blessed. Those who stand the test will come out stronger. And those who love God will receive the crown of life. So keep going. Keep trusting. You can do hard things.